I am Vijayalakshmi Pradhan from Bullion Bulletin. We are very privileged here to have Mr. Rajan Venkatesh, Managing Director, Scotia Bank. Welcome to Bullion Bulletin and 11th India International Gold Convention. This 80-20 restriction on gold imports in India has been quite a shock for this industry. So as a banker's perspective, how do you see at this situation? How is it affecting the industry?
Well, I'm not sure whether you can call it as quite a shock, because the 80-20 has been, people were worried, the government, the Reserve Bank of India and the authorities were quite worried about the current account deficit and the worsening situation as far as foreign exchange reserves were concerned. And gold imports, as we are all aware of, is the second largest import after oil. So therefore something necessarily had to be done for curtailing these imports. And after a lot of deliberations between the government, the Reserve Bank of India and the trade, they came up with this 80-20 rule. To answer your question about how has it affected, insofar as the government is concerned, definitely it has made an improvement. The current account deficit has come down from 4.8 to 1.7%. Gold imports have shrunk. It has shrunk by significantly, by maybe 40-50%. But having said that, so the government achieved its objective. The trade, there was initially a liquidity squeeze, lack of imports, lack of clarity on the various regulations that the 80-20 came up with, and the fact that everybody who had to import or who had permission to import had to export 20% of that gold. Yes, it created a little bit of, not even a little bit, it did create some liquidity squeeze and shortages in the market, with the result that the premiums really shot up sky high.
But certainly for these bullion bankers who have been importing gold for domestic jewelry demand, for them it must be like operational problem for this 80-20, because importers have to be exporters and exporters have to be importers. So it is a quite wholesome situation.
Not necessarily. Yes, it definitely, there was bigger problem than what normally we used to face when the imports were not restricted. But all the banks put together have worked their way around it. They sought clarification from the regulators, and the imports have started commencing. And subsequently now, very recently in May, the government and the Reserve Bank allowed all these premier trading houses to import gold. There is just a little bit of a divergence in the fact that for the banks, it depended upon their export performance, which effectively means how much in earlier years did you supply to exporters, on the basis of which your import limit was decided. Whereas for the government, for these premier trading houses, it depends upon their import performance over the last 2 years, which we think is a little unfair.
The CAD problem, it has been come down to 2% of GDP, and forex reserve has also been improved. So don't you think this is the time to remove restrictions?
The CAD definitely has come down to 1.7%, or close to 2% you can say. But I don't think that the government would feel confident enough to remove these restrictions right now, because look at the geopolitical crisis. There's crisis in Ukraine, there's crisis in Libya, there's the Iraq crisis, and oil prices have been a little stable, or they have tapered off a little bit. But if oil prices do go up because of these crises, then it's going to be a big drain on the foreign exchange reserves. And if gold prices continue to fall as they have been falling by almost $500-600 over the last 6 to 8 months, and the imports just shoot up, the government would be very, very concerned about the worsening current account deficit.
Coming to gold monetization scheme and gold deposit scheme, government has been planning so many things so often, but currently there is no particular solution for this and how to operationalize the same. So what is your take on this? How can it be more popular product, and how can it be launched proper way?
I am on one of the panels that is discussing the gold monetization scheme, but briefly to answer your question, yes, it has been in discussions both with the government as well as the Reserve Bank of India. But the big issue that needs to be surmounted is, how can you source gold? Sourcing is a big problem. You have refineries, you have assayers, you have everything. But sourcing is a major problem. And that's what hopefully we will discuss in the panel, exchange ideas and come up with some solutions.
China, it is having a very good gold financial scheme, and it is doing gold trade through license basis. Don't you think it is a quite valuable option, viable option in Indian market given the constraints?
To some extent, that is what the government has also done. In China, the licenses have been given to select individuals or entities. The same thing the government has done by imposing an 80-20 rule. Effectively, the other alternative to the 80-20 was the government could have simply said, okay, X agency, this is going to be your quota for this year's import. But they didn't do that because that would be tantamount to being highly restrictive. So they said, we're not placing any restriction on the quantum, but depending upon what you supply to the exporters, you can always import 4 times that quantity.
European banks and central banks, they have again renewed their central bank schemes till 2019 for 5 years again from September. So how do you think this development is helpful for the worldwide gold market, bullion market?
Apart from Germany and one other bank, I don't recall the name, they have marginally been sellers, but many of the central banks have been actively adding to their reserves. Turkey has added to their reserves, Ukraine has added to their reserves, and a few other banks. And despite that, the prices have not really gone up. It's not going to have any significant impact. The ETFs have globally, they have been downsizing themselves. The quantum asset under management in ETFs have been very low.
This 11th India International Gold Convention, how are you enjoying this conference?
This IIGC convention has always been very good, very informative. You can see from the number of delegates that are here that people really value this. They think that this conference does add value to them, and that's why they are all here. And I'm sure, people will go away with something to take home.
Thank you for this insightful information.